was once a very nervous bride-to-be who was determined that the big day would go well, and she really needed to get her head around what was going to happen. So she tried to learn what was going to happen. She'd be walking up the aisle, standing in front of the altar, then singing a hymn. So in the days leading up to marrying her beloved, she was heard going around muttering to herself, "I'll alter him. I'll alter him. I'll alter him." It had a happy ending. Through her love, she did. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that, because it may or may not have anything to do with what else I'm saying this morning, but I thought it was worthwhile. It may do. Keep listening. It may do. It may come back. Yes, I'm talking more about what we're calling the Church of Tomorrow, and I want to just stress one or two things before I get into the main bit. That is the title of a book, which many of us are becoming used to, a book by John McGinley. But it's more than a book. The book just represents something. This is about the next move of God and what he's going to be doing in it and what he's already doing in it. So it's not just about a book which somebody has written. It's much more than that. I also want to stress something about the title, because the term Church of Tomorrow might be a bit misleading, because as we know, tomorrow never comes. It's always a day away, I'm told. It gives the impression of something in the distance, something that perhaps we're going to eventually get towards, but it's for tomorrow. And in fact, this isn't about tomorrow at all. It's about something that's already begun. It's about today. It's about now. It's already happening. And it's about us wanting to join in with something that God is already doing. It's actually about reforming the church back towards the kingdom, another stage. There are three things that have been very much on my heart as I've been thinking, as I have been for these weeks, spending about 50% of my time on these sort of things, reading, praying, listening, and so on. And actually what I've got here is a whole collection of my sort of research into this. That's not my sermon, okay? But I've got three things that have been on my heart that I was feeling I'm going to talk about at some point. One is that the Church of Tomorrow will involve people who believe the whole Bible. We'll be whole Bible believers. We'll have a Bible that's holy, not full of holes. I'll put it like that. There won't be whole swathes cut out of it. We will get back to the point where we will believe the whole Bible. The second thing is we will understand mission better in terms of being community-based. We will become missional communities. And the third thing is that we'll need to learn how to disciple and nurture and mentor people in the first stages of their Christian life. And I now know that that's the one that God really wants me to emphasize today. But as part of the general background and framework to all this, could we have the diagram up, which I've mentioned before? There we are. Some of you have seen this before. I'll have to keep explaining it, and do talk to me afterwards if it still doesn't make sense. It's a very simple understanding of the history of the church over 2,000 years in the West compared to the kingdom. And the kingdom of God is where Jesus has been all this time. Jesus has been walking along his way, the way, the truth, and the life. But unfortunately, over the period of time in the West, man has chosen to go a different way. And it began very early. It began just a couple of generations after Jesus, when all sorts of different ideas, philosophies, and politics all started to get mixed up in this. And suddenly we had a church which was nothing to do with the kingdom, or very little to do with the kingdom. And it got further and further and further away. Now that's all I'm trying to illustrate on that. There's obviously a horizontal time scale. I'm not trying to make anything vertically from the time scale of it, or the lines, not necessarily that length or how many there are. It's just a representation of something to show how the church began to move away from the kingdom. And as you lose the way, you lose the truth and you lose the life. I'm going to risk an analogy here. I'm not a gardener, so someone may well be wanting to correct me very soon, but I have a feeling that if you've got something growing and it's got the roots in the ground, and if you want to take it somewhere else, you don't chop it off at ground level. dig a hole and stick it in there. Now, I don't know, are there plants that actually will survive that and grow and flourish? Or do you need to take the roots with them? Okay, well, what happened to the message of Christ was that it was transplanted without the roots eventually. Not at first. Those of us that have been reading and looking at Galatians might have been amazed to see just how much that Paul puts into that letter that is from the Old Testament, about Abraham and Moses, and I think even Hagar and Ishmael, the covenants, the amount of quotations that Paul brings in to his letters to Gentiles from the Old Testament. How could he do that? Because when he went and taught them, he took those roots with him and he made sure they understood that, and they were birthed fully in the roots of the Christian message. And that's what we find. We're okay in the Bible because all the apostles and indeed the next generation did it that way. But after time, things changed. Now, I'm not going to go into more detail now. That's probably for another time. We can look at that at some of our Monday evenings, perhaps. But it's part of the problem of going further and further away. That's the way the church went in the West over a period of several hundred years until we ended with that, what's meant to be a much longer line at the top there, something which became known as Christendom, which has nothing to do really with either Christ or the kingdom, to be honest. But, and this is the important thing, about 500 years ago, God began to do something new. What we call the Reformation. You only know afterwards that you can call it the Reformation. But at the time, someone called Luther began to, shall we say, begin the process that God was going to reform his church back towards the kingdom. And one of the messages of the reformers was that we are being reformed and always reforming. It was never something that was going to happen in one go. That didn't make sense. In fact, it couldn't with Luther, because Luther did very, very little to start the Reformation. He did something very important. He got the message of salvation and justification by faith back into the church. But even Luther wasn't a whole Bible believer. Did you realize that? If you remember, when we looked at the book of James, one of the things we realized was that James didn't like that book, that letter. He called it an epistle of straw, as though it got very little nourishment or benefit from it. He loved Paul, he would have loved Galatians, but no, not James. And he didn't think the book of Revelation should be there either. And in fact, last week I was at Broadway and they'd asked me to preach on the book of Esther, and I had to tell them, actually, Luther thought this book should not be in the Bible either. So Luther got at things going, but there's lots of things that he couldn't do, didn't do, and so on. Luther never spoke hardly at all on the Holy Spirit. He didn't talk about the baptism in the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit. But he focused, if you like, fixated almost, on this one thing that's got things going. But God knew what he was doing. And so wave after wave of God's Spirit was going to come and bring back into the church the things that men had got rid of when they went their own way. And so we have now baptism, back to believers' baptism. We actually have the priesthood of all believers. Hopefully we know that. We had the evangelical awakening and so on, missionary movements and so on. And then eventually we had more waves of Pentecostalism and charismatic and so on. And now we're at a stage, I believe, where God is wanting to reform the kingdom. Another line needs to be drawn. Obviously, you can see the kingdom, it's not to scale. There's no prediction going on here. Don't think I'm saying that J means that Jesus is coming back within a couple of days or something. It just is an illustration of one important thing. But the next line is beginning to be drawn. The next stage of the Reformation is coming into place. And therefore, calling it the Church of Tomorrow is one way of describing it, as long as you bear in mind that tomorrow has actually begun today. And in fact, probably about 15 years ago, when you look back and see what's actually been happening. As far as being whole Bible people, I just want to add one or two comments on this, I think. Point. It's great we've got a Bible reading program, and it's great whether you're using that or another one, that doesn't matter. But a Bible reading program is a means to an end, it's not an end in itself. In fact, reading the Bible is never it's a means to an end. The end is always what you do with it. The end, as you know from James, hearing has to lead to doing, and reading has to lead to believing. In the end, the question is, have we not read the whole Bible, but are we starting to bring our beliefs in line with God's truth and with reality? We talk about the Old Testament, don't we, as the book that Jesus had, the book that Jesus read. It's actually the book that Jesus believed. So if we're following Jesus, we want to believe what he believed. You know, there's no such thing as New Testament Christians. You've got to be whole Bible Christians and so on. Now, this is something that we're beginning to address, I think, and I'm trusting that this will continue. So I want to move on to one of the other things that we'll talk about, and that is missional church, being part of missional communities. And I've read this. Evidence shows that substantial numbers of those disengaged from churches long to be part of a vital, revolutionary, compassionate movement of Jesus followers, such as existed pre-Christendom. There is a yearning for authentic Christian community. Wow, that's good. And it's going to happen out there. It's not necessarily going to happen in here. We've got to be prepared to go out there and be part of this. This is about being participants, not observers. This is about moving in the way that will help this sort of thing to happen. The book that I just quoted from is called The Invisible Church, and in it has some nice little cartoons which I thought would give you a moment's respite from me. I don't know which one's coming up first, we'll see in a minute. Yeah, there it is. It's quite simple. You know this, really. Where actually is church? Well, it's wherever you are. Wherever you're going to be tomorrow morning, Thursday afternoon, Saturday evening, and so on. Church is all over the place in this sense. The next one, I quite like this one. You've got the visible church on the left, and then the invisible church is where those people go and do all their different things, yeah? I like the one on the left, actually. I think we should give that a go sometime. Do we have volunteers for... wouldn't that be great for our big opening in September? Get thinking now. Yes, Peter's making a note, I can see. Yes, he's keen on this. And then, of course, we come piling down from there and we go off into our different bits. That's where church is. It's wherever you go. Wherever you go. There's another one, isn't there? Because this one says that if we stay exactly where we are, which I think it seems to be underground or something, yeah, we're safe. We want to be safe. That's what we like about being church. I notice when I look at that church that's safe is pretty small. Maybe you ran out of ink or space or something, but 3 people being preached at, okay, that's in some ways like old church. So what is happening within this Church of Tomorrow thing that's about missional church and so on? I said it's not just a book, but part of what that book explains is how God is moving already, not just within the Anglican Church, but within other churches as well, as part of this. And as part of what's going on in this church multiplication thing, there is something called myriad. Myriad is a word which means 1,000 or maybe thousands. It's about lay-led planting and producing new community centres. And I do suggest that if this is the sort of thing that really is on your heart, then have a look at this and one or two other things that I'm going to suggest. What is said about Myriad, our aim is to support the planting of thousands of new, predominantly lay-led churches throughout the Church of England, and indeed the Church in England, in the next 10 years. Now that's starting beforehand, not coming up, but partnering with other church networks to inspire similar movement and witness the re-evangelization of our nation. We are for everyday people and leaders who are pursuing the mission of God and seeking to plant churches in their context. We want to resource, training and support, bring together the learning from different networks, act as a catalyst to inspire change within the church. We're inviting you to join this exciting adventure of faith. We don't have all the answers, we're just gripped by the call of God to his church and excited to explore what that means. So, for instance, there you have a 5-session course designed for small groups to examine the ideas behind church planting, which they use historical case studies as well as contemporary studies and so on. And they offer those who are lay people who want to get into planting churches wherever they are the opportunity to journey together on what they call a learning pathway, which will equip them over a long period of time together with others. Now, already I think there are hundreds of these happening because it has been going for some time. So that's just one program. And then as part of my reading, I came across something else which I hadn't heard about before. And it's called Fresh Expressions. Just need to get your teeth right first. freshexpressions.org and so on. Now this isn't just Anglican, this seems to be Methodist and even in the Salvation Army. And they've been doing this for over 18 years. So already they've got a lot of experience, a lot of people involved in this, they've got a lot of resources. They call themselves a movement of mission-shaped communities, equipping, calling, connecting ordinary people to form new communities with our extraordinary God. We're a movement of visionaries, prophets, evangelists, creative entrepreneurs from across all church traditions who have the gift and faith to go out, listen, love, serve, tell people about Jesus, and then work within these new communities to create a new and authentic expression of church that makes sense to them. They say that the gap between the world and the current church is too big for most people to leap across. So we start new Christian communities in the nooks and crannies of people's ordinary lives. I've no idea what nooks and crannies look like in people's ordinary lives. I just feel this morning I want to inspire and encourage some of you and say this is what you can be part of, what you can be involved in. Fresh Expressions is a form of church for changing culture for the benefit of those who are not yet members of it. And of course they've thought this through and they've produced programs and different activities that can help and so on. But it began actually quite some time ago, and the two leaders that obviously got the initial vision of this felt that God was telling them to stop starting with church. Okay, you've got to think differently from the word go when you're thinking about church planting. You've got to be where the people are and so on. So Fresh Expressions is a growing network of, and it describes itself again, but the important point at the end is creating places where people can grow as missional disciples. So they're missional, but they take discipleship on course as well. So this sort of thing I think is very exciting, and it's happening a great deal. And it's actually quite fast-paced now, if you think about it. The Fresh Expressions movement, and I've read a bit about it, said they've already got 3,000 such small Christian missional communities, and that was in 2017, it was dated. Now they reckon they're closer to 4,000, which is more than Tesco's. I mean, more than Tesco's have shops. Tesco's are not into missional communities yet, but one day, you never know. You never know. They describe themselves as a form of church for our changing culture, established primarily for the benefit of those not yet members of any church. It comes into being through the principles of listening, service, incarnational mission, and making disciples. So that's the second thing that I've been researching, thinking about, coming across. Incidentally, I gathered that there's plans for there to be a new Christian community centre, that's the right word for it, somewhere in Berkhamsted. And I'm keeping my eyes open on that because there's an old pub that a group are wanting to buy and turn it into a Christian community centre. Not a church, a Christian community centre. And I think there are other movements that are also doing this same sort of thing. It's all part of what God is doing. So he wants us to be whole Bible believers to help complete the Reformation. Can we have the first diagram back again? actually, because I'm going to keep pointing to it from time to time. Because the crucial bit, as I said, is to get people walking along the bottom line and not getting stuck in some of the church-based things of the past. And so I'm going to talk now a bit more about the third thing, which I gather is probably what God wants us to think about more today. And I hope I've left myself enough time. I think I have. Here's one thing I wrote down. We can look for the perfect discipleship program to work through, but discipleship isn't ultimately about a course we do, but about a life we live. And this is where there's got to be this change of mentality. And I have to say, I have to almost confess, I have to almost apologize, I got this wrong. When I first started thinking about discipling, what we needed for this some years ago now a little bit, and I had this vision of something called the Way, finding truth and life. And then I began to turn it into a discipleship course and realized that wasn't what God wanted. It's not about putting together yet another package in which you lecture to people and hope that they'll become disciples. Discipling people is not about information. It's about information. Did you hear that? It's not about information. It's about information. How do you get this to happen within people? Well, the only way is you've got to take them right back to the beginning, and you've got to show them how to walk the way, the truth, and the life with Jesus, the kingdom way. Because we don't know where their backgrounds are, we don't know where they've come from, how much they've been churchified, how much they've been involved in Christianity, which I think, as I said before, Christianity became invented as a religion along that upward path further away from the kingdom. You don't find the word Christianity in the Bible, or indeed being used in the first 100 years or so. Just like you don't really hear about them being called Christians, they were followers of the way. So they describe themselves. But nowadays people will come with a preconception of what Christianity is like, what church is like, and we might need to completely upside down what they're thinking about, turn upside down what I'm saying they're thinking about. We just need to be aware. But it can only be done on a one-to-one mentoring, discipling, nurturing sort of program, not as a fixed program as such, but as each one of us doing our bit in part of it. Historical drift, and I think that's the sort of thing that's talking about there, has substituted making disciples into initiating people into church membership, as though that will do. Come and be part of us. Come and join us as a church, and you'll become like us. Oh, how about come to Jesus and become like Jesus? Now, you don't become like Jesus overnight. You have to walk that particular way. It's about being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and then doing what Jesus did. That's the way some people have described it. Discipleship isn't a course, it's a cost. It's a cost on people's lives. But the cost on a Christian's life of non-discipleship could be even more. One of the things that has got to happen if we're going to get into the whole nurturing thing is that we've got to understand that when we bring people to Christ, that this is an expectation. It's got to be part of the gospel. The gospel isn't just come and believe in Jesus, get forgiven, and then say thank you, you're going to heaven, and enjoy your life while you're waiting. Discipleship has got to be implicit within preaching the gospel from the beginning, that if you do come to Christ, if you want his forgiveness, if you want the salvation he offers, then discipleship is part of it. And one of the reasons why discipleship got lost along the way here is because there was a loss of the understanding of Jesus as a living teacher. That he was there still to teach you, and otherwise he's not just someone sitting up in heaven waiting for you to turn up there one day, sort of thing. There's so many different things that came into the early church of that kind, which are so wrong biblically, that we're going to have to break through some of these things in order to get discipleship back on track. You see, I think that's probably why I did start off with this illustration of I'll alter you, I'll alter him, I'll alter him, and so on. What is it about ultimately? It's about people being altered. It's about transformation. It's about Christ being formed in them. I can't do that for you. I can't do that for anybody else. I can do it for myself, I hope. And that's what I've got to want to do first of all, before I see it happen in other people. Otherwise, what am I? I'm a hypocrite, aren't I? And that's so easy for a teacher to fall into. I can tell you all sorts of wonderful things and then not bother with them myself. And that's the challenge to me on this. I'm not ahead of you on this one. We've got to work this out together. Okay? But if there's a loss of Jesus as a living teacher amongst us, then it's very difficult to get across to people the whole business of what discipleship is about. Can we have that text up? I want to talk about Matthew 28, I think, for a while on this. It's very well known, isn't it? You know about this. Okay, I want to explain some of the words and highlight one or two things, because it really is important. You notice, first of all, that it talks about go. But I want to tell you that it doesn't mean you have to pack your bags and go somewhere. You don't have to book a plane ticket. That's not what the word go actually means. The actual crucial bit is the make disciples. The go, it's got some fancy grammatical term like an attendant participle or something, but it's much better thought of as you are going along. In your going, make sure you're making disciples along the way that you are going. We're all going places. There was an advert on TV recently. Two actors were interacting with each other, and one said to the other, do you eat food? Yeah, I eat food. Yeah, I eat food as well, yeah. You go places? Yeah, I go places, yeah. So do I go places. And suddenly they realise they have a wonderful friendship, and together in life they're going to eat food and go places together. I've got no idea what they're advertising. To me, advertisements are meant to be a source of entertainment, not spending money, to be honest. But the thing that resonated with me is this: do you go places? You go places. That's your going. And as you go in those places where you go anyway, those are the people you're going to meet that will need you to mentor and disciple them, or firstly bring them to Christ, obviously, and then they're the ones that you will mentor. They're there. You will find them. It's as you go. You don't have to pack your bags and go somewhere. The other interesting thing is that I'm told that the word disciple in the Bible is not a verb, it's only a noun. So you don't disciple people. Now that's interesting. We think we do. We disciple people. Actually, what it's really about is making disciples because you yourself are a disciple. Only disciples can make disciples. It's showing them what it's like. It's showing them what discipleship really means, how you've been changed by Jesus. In fact, the first step of your go and make is actually be a disciple yourself. And then you get alongside someone, and then you can say to them, this is what it's like, let's walk together on this. And it may be new to you, you may have done it for years, but it doesn't matter. You as a disciple are showing someone else what it's like to be a disciple. It's a challenge, isn't it? It's a bit scary, really, because your mentees might say to you, are you doing that then? Because that's what you wanted me to do. Mentees is a word. I haven't just made that up. It does mean those who are being mentored. Okay? They're not soft, chewy, mint-flavoured sweets. That's Mentos. Okay? Other mints are available, but mentees are the people that we are going to mentor. And that's a good way of thinking about it, because it's not just about preaching at them or telling them stuff. It's about helping them along the way. Let's look at the next bit of this. What do we actually do? Do we just teach them stuff? We teach them to obey. How on earth do you teach people to obey? I spent a career in school teaching and I still don't know. But how do we teach people to obey? Wow. Well, only by getting close to them and by walking with them day by day almost, time by time, and saying, how are you getting on that? Are you doing that yet? Okay, now let's work out how you do that better, how you learn to obey what Jesus has said. That, again, is scary. And it's not just teach them to obey something I've said. There's a big word there, everything. Everything. Wow. I mean, that is really big. If you made a list of everything that Jesus said, everything that he commanded, I don't know how long it would be, but I bet as you look through that, you'd think, I don't really like that one. I'm not sure about that. That maybe doesn't quite fit what our society says these days. How am I going to get someone to obey what Jesus said when society is totally contrary to it? That's quite a change, isn't it? It's quite a change. But it doesn't work if you just say, oh, I'll tell you a few things about that Jesus suggested that you might want to do eventually. That's not discipling, that's not mentoring people. It's not telling people how they can go on in their lives and so on. In some ways, because of the journey of the church away, that diagram is not there anymore, but that's fine. You sort of should memorize it by now. You should know where I'm coming from on this. It's only a simple picture. Don't make too much of it. But I keep finding it meaningful in these different things. That discipleship got lost along the way because it didn't go along the way, if you like. It went its own way into a different sort of churchified atmosphere and so on things. Jesus himself did not invite people to become Christians. He didn't invite them to convert to Christianity, because none of those things were around at the time. He invited people to come to him. Come to him. There is another text, but we'll put that up, because it does act as something at the beginning. Jesus saw the crowds, and of course he taught them. But the thing it always says about disciples, everywhere you look in the Bible, in the Gospels about disciples, they come to Jesus. They come out of the crowds and they come and sit at his feet or walk with him or something. Part of helping people and discipling them, mentoring them, is so that they will keep coming to Jesus. Because you won't be there all the time anyway. You've got to get them used to walking through life with Jesus next to them. In fact, biblically, that's called being yoked to Jesus. Did you realize that when Jesus said, come to me and take my yoke, he's basically saying, come and be a disciple. You can look at that passage sometime. Time and again, come to Jesus is a symbol of, I'm a disciple. I'm going to get closer. I'm going to walk your way. I'm going to find out what it is that you particularly want. If you be with Jesus, if you practice the presence of Jesus, a lot of these things involve some of the old sort of spiritual disciplines, really. It's the things that were known in the early church and done by some of the great saints and have got sort of discarded over the past. And we need to rediscover what some of these are as such. It's about contemplation, about consciously being aware of retraining the mind as part of being with Jesus and understanding the disciplines that were like that. And then you become more like Jesus and then more able to do what he did. As I say, I think that is quite a challenge, but I don't think we can go into the church of tomorrow or be part of the church of today, whatever you want to call it, without bearing this in mind, because it's a new thing for us to become part of. But I want to finish there. In fact, I'm sure you want me to finish there as well. But I want to finish for now, because I say this is just the beginning of a conversation, really, or a beginning of 2 or 3 conversations. I'm putting something out there for us to think about more. It's not going to happen all in one go, just like now. But earlier in the worship, I felt God say this: I have brought you so far, I will help you with what's coming next. I will help you. I will help you. And that's all I need to hear, to know that I can do this and we can go on together. God has brought us so far. May he continue, as he says he will.